dude, the world changed, and we need you to be different here. There's a lot of harm that patriarchy makes for all of us, while at the same time, we as men have privileges. The way the world looks at us with our deeper voices and thinks, oh, he must know more.
Why do men feel so disconnected, and why is it normalized for women to have closeness with women?
Yeah.
And when, men are close with men, it's considered or ridiculed as gay or weak.
If you show vulnerability, you're not a man, you're weak. If you're too close to your male buddies, that must be gay.
You've personally lived through one of the most extreme manifestations, unfortunately, a school shooting.
Yeah.
Is there a distinct link between the way boys are socialized into masculinity and the tragic reality of gun violence?
We make violence normal among boys and men all the time.
Hello everyone from the studio, I'm Veronika and welcome to another episode of Beat Sexism Society series. Today we're diving into a topic that sparks debate, discomfort and deep reflection: masculinity in the 21st century. And we couldn't have asked for a more insightful guest to help us navigate this conversation. We are honored to welcome Dr. Gary Barker, a global expert on masculinity, fatherhood, and male engagement in gender equality. He is the founder and executive director of Equimundo, an organization reshaping masculinity and promoting positive male role models globally. Also, he's the author and co-author of several key research studies, including the State of the World's Fathers Report and the Man Box, which analyze the social construct of masculinity and their impact on health, violence, and gender relations. Gary advises UN agencies, corporations, and governments on engaging men as allies in gender equality. His work has been instrumental in redefining modern masculinity and understanding the challenges men face in a rapidly changing world. Gary, it's an absolute privilege to have you here, especially as you're now in Czech Republic. I mean, what a fate, because we've been in Beat Sexism planning an episode on masculinity for the longest time, and your expertise and your presence here feels like the perfect moment. So welcome to Beat Sexism Talks.
All right, thanks for having me.
In today's discussion, we'll unpack the identity crisis of modern men, the epidemic of male loneliness, also the rise of hypermasculine influencers shaping young men's view, Donald Trump's influence on masculinity in the US, and we're gonna explore how gender roles are shifting and that some men might feel left behind, and what is actually the positive masculinity look on today's world. So this episode will be thought-provoking, maybe even challenging, but most importantly, it's a conversation we need to have. So let's get started.
All right.
Gary, let's maybe first break down the terms masculinity and toxic masculinity, because I feel there's a lot of noise around it, maybe the misuse of toxic masculinity, but I don't know, you tell me. So masculinity was long defined and associated with the strength, the dominance, leadership, discipline and logic. So how do you define masculinity today, and how does its meaning evolved?
Yeah, I mean, simply put, it's the way we're taught to be men, with all those things that you brought in there.
Yeah.
And it's so varied. Every time we put an adjective there, you can say, well, that also applies to women, and you can say it doesn't apply to all men. So I think we have to see it as this big and kind of messy thing. And I think, if anything, lots of things have changed, particularly because women's roles have changed. So if traditionally the most important thing that men hung our identities on were that we're the providers, we think we're in charge, we mostly do things outside the home, and we think that's our realm, that no longer holds in the world anymore. And I think lots of men feel confused of, wait, if that's what you define manhood as, and women can do those things now, who am I? What makes me different? What makes me a man? And then along, the last, probably 2018 or so, it was toxic was the English word of the year, according to the Oxford Dictionary, often toxic workplace, toxic masculinity. For us working in the space of manhood, that became really easy to explain what we do. Because for a long time, it was hard to say, we work on engaging men to be different, to be caring, to be nonviolent. We could suddenly say, we work to overcome toxic masculinity. But that phrase is also really fraught, because I think most men hear it and it feels, wait, I'm male, I see myself as masculine, and now every time you say the word masculinity, you say toxic. So you think I'm poison. So we don't really use that phrase anymore. We don't find it that helpful. It feels like it's kind of an indictment against men and boys. There are men we need to call out for harm, but that phrase just doesn't seem to get us anywhere. So I think often those technical terms, you can maybe sweep them aside and say, how did you learn to be a man? What do you like about it? What do you want to leave behind? What do you want to change? How much does it matter to you? Why do you feel sometimes trapped in it? So I think those are the questions that kind of resonate with men, rather than kind of getting stuck in our technical terms.
Yeah, because the toxic masculinity, usually when you use it, men get offended because they somehow think that, all of masculinity is toxic and that just manhood and men themselves are just that.
Yeah.
And so do you see that this terms is maybe like oversimplifying the conversation?
I mean, they're loaded in a sense of, son of a friend of mine was just saying, oh man, we can never get it right. Women think we're always, behind. We can't catch up on stuff. It does assume that someone is watching your behavior to see if you're going to do the right thing. And none of us really behave or react very well if I feel like I'm looking at you for something that you're doing wrong, as opposed to, it's complicated. We all internalize these ideas. Women internalize these ideas. That study I just saw that came out in the US, that women in the US feel like, oh, if a man doesn't look masculine enough, he'll probably have trouble getting dates. More men think that than women, but a lot of women think that as well. So I think we have to say, it's not that the harmful ideas about gender live just in men's bodies. There are women as well. Women hold these ideas. And so I think it's how do we have this conversation that says these ideas about manhood that restrict us as men and that also restrict women, or ideas about womanhood that restrict women, they harm all of us. So how can we talk about it in a way that feels like, I see that you were raised with those ideas and I want to help you challenge them, and I see that you were raised with those and I want to help you challenge them. So it's really hard to step into this conversation without feeling like we're judged as men for the shortfalls that we have, and there's plenty of them, all of us as humans do, as opposed to a conversation that says, let's figure this out together.
Yeah. Let's get into the topic of the identity crisis of modern men, because in recent years, there's been an increasing discussion about the so-called crisis of male identity. And obviously, the traditional notions of masculinity are being challenged and leading to some men seeking the return to conventional and traditional roles, as I like to call it, back to the cave solutions. So let's get into actually like the appeal of the traditional masculinity to so many men, the understanding of this sort of like regression, I would say. What factors contribute to the allure and of the returning to traditional masculine roles to so many men?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's kind of an existential one for men at the moment, right? I mean, for decades, if not centuries, men were told, if you work hard, you have an identity, you have enough income to support a family, you will perhaps, if you're heterosexual, you'll have a woman doing the work at home, you'll have 2.5 children, and that will be manhood, right? Yeah. Those things, they were never true for everyone, but now they're all unraveling. The areas of work that used to be kind of traditional men's work have changed tremendously. Women are in the workplace. Men are expected to and are doing more of the care work. Incomes are unstable. We're looking at huge economic shifts and political shifts that leave a lot of men saying, well, who am I? At the same time, depend on which year you want to take. For the last few decades, we've had a project in the world that says we believe in full equality for women. We've talked a lot about girls and young women in education sector. And that battle we've won. Women are now 60, depending on which country you look at in Europe, women are now 60% of university students. Men are now the minority. A lot of professions where, let's say, medical doctors, that used to be, well, this was mostly men's profession, and now some of those have flipped and they're mostly women's professions. As a father of a daughter who's now in her mid-20s doing her thing in the world, it was easy in some ways to say, I know how to raise an empowered daughter, right? We've got films, we've got women in media, we've got women politicians, we've got Disney movies that all said, this is what empowered girlhood looks like. But I think for boys, we haven't had a similar kind of conversation of, this is what modern manhood can look like. Ways that you may have learned from your father or grandfather, we're changing here. So I feel like simplistically, it feels like we didn't send the email to men or the text or the WhatsApp or whatever you use to communicate to say, dude, the world changed, and we need you to be different here. And to your question of why are men reacting and why does this old version, attract us? Research that we've done in the US found that the men who felt the most economically unstable, they weren't sure if their income was stable, and if they also felt it was not going to be easy for them to have an intimate relationship, so to have a partner, were the guys who most gravitate to an old-fashioned version of manhood. And then we asked them a bit why, and they said, well, it's simple. It gives you identity, it gives you something that's clear, there's a set of rules that look pretty clear, and then now we have a media that's making money on that. We have, the UFC fighting, we have a presidential candidate, we have lots of voices online, and I know we'll talk more about that, who are saying, this is cool, we respect you, this is the way to be. So suddenly there's both I'm lost, and someone over here is saying, I have this old version of manhood that seems to work, and it kind of resonates with ways that we grew up a little bit, right, of play fighting and all the stuff that we as boys learn around, playing with guns, using our fists, not showing emotions. All that stuff kind of comes together to say, don't step into this modern manhood, stick with it, be tough, and you will get all these things. And we've got a huge challenge for those of us who want to question those versions of manhood to say, I'm not critiquing you, man. I'm talking about this version of manhood that I don't think is very good for you, and it probably keeps you from being the best human you can be. So how can we maybe throw off some of that stuff from the past, and some of it you may want to keep, but step into an idea that's a bit more modern, that says you can be more things, and that you'll actually live better and love better if you take them on.
Yeah, actually, there is this rise of masculinity coaches even, and biohacking for how to get more testosterone. Like you get all these, masculinity retreats, men, beating themselves and, screaming, just trying to connect to their inner hunter or whatsoever. Yeah. You have these bro podcasts and the anti-woke alpha male shows. So there's plenty of this content right now. And so I'm also asking, because there's also, in the feminine way, there's also like the femininity coaching and how to be more feminine. Yeah. On the other hand, how to be your most gentle self. So are these movements part of the same problem? Like, are we both genders finding themselves and like going for the simple way?
Yeah, I think we're all confused, right, is what that tells me. And I think it's I think that search for, there's something about the way, that we're coming into gender issues at the moment, right? There's a huge, in parts of Europe and in the US, we have a greater number of young men who say they aren't in relationships than ever before. That is, they're not finding ways to connect with young women or even with male partners, if that's their preference. I think a lot of young women are frustrated by young men who they perceive, well, I don't like the guys that I meet on dating apps, and there's very few that I want to date again, and he doesn't know how to talk to me, and he doesn't respond to my text. So I think, we're kind of looking at who's to blame for this. And I think if we look at that long list that you made of where guys are looking for information, there's one, on the one hand, it's kind of easy to say, well, those are all stupid places and you're being silly. And I think sometimes we want to say that to some men in those spaces. But I see it as a healthy search, right? You're trying to say there's something up about the way I learned to be a man, the way things are right now that aren't working. And a lot of those things to try to look better, to try to figure out what is it that makes me attractive to someone. I don't think those are inherently negative. It's what extremes you go to. And are you following the guy who says, you have to put women in their place and treat her badly, and you're the one who demands sex? Or are you talking to somebody who says, here's some ways you might need to learn how to talk about these issues. Here's how you might need to learn how to listen. Here's a way that you might be interesting to someone that's not only based on some traditional view of manhood. I think women searching as well can be useful. I critique the kind of, in the US, we have the trad wife. I don't know if you have that trend going on.
Yes.
Feels a little, backward looking, to say the least. But at the same time, if women are also trying to say, well, the work world wants me to be a certain kind of hyper-competitive human. Maybe I don't want to be that all the time. Maybe there are ways, but I think the issue is we have to not, either one of us, be in boxes about this, to say, why can't women be tough at times, and why can't men be sensitive, and why does that mean we stop being men or women? I think that I think is what we want to try to get. Mm-hmm. And we've just been doing some look at the space called the manosphere. And about 70% of what is looked for in English, which is a lot of millions of men online looking for stuff, I'd say about 70% of it is either positive or harmless. It's just guys trying to figure out, I'm confused, I don't know where to go. They're not looking for the negative when they step into that space. They're often recruited into it. But I think that 70% of guys who are just looking for, I want to be a better person, that's actually a good thing, I think. It's what they do once they get there, but I think that's a good thing for me. That tells me guys are in trouble, but they know they're in trouble. And if I know that I need help, that's the first start. Mm-hmm.
I want to talk more about men adapting to the rapidly changing world, because it seems that they're struggling with the masculine role in today's world, where women, as you said, we're attaining higher education, we're getting a job that was previously basically handed to men by patriarchy, if you will. And so have men become stagnant to these historical privileges within the patriarchal system, leading to challenges in adapting to the current societal change? And are women just getting better at how to patriarchy?
That's a good question. I mean, the world was never fair for all men, or never advantageous for all men, right? And so I think part of the challenge as well is many men feel that, well, I'm told now in the workplace that I've had privilege forever. And some men are like, well, not me necessarily. Or maybe I had some privilege that I don't want to acknowledge. And I think we do have to acknowledge that on average, men have had privilege. But that privilege wasn't spread evenly. Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk have a different amount than the delivery, than the Bolt delivery guy who's bringing you your sushi. So, we've got to look at just that huge, difference between what does it mean that I've been privileged. So one, I've come to a workplace that says, well, you've had all the privilege all the time, and I'm stepping into there as a just arriving at the workplace going, why am I responsible for this? I'm not wealthy. I didn't bring all this power. Are you saying I also don't get any attention? I'm not deserved in this workplace? So it's a confusing moment to get men to say there's several things going on. Historically, men have had privilege, and a lot of that is being dismantled, but it's not all dismantled. We still have about a 20% income gap around the world of men's income compared to women, mostly because of who does the care of children at home, right? So, but there is privilege. I don't feel that I have it. And I'm coming into a workplace that says, get with this program of equality, you've had privilege. I think we've got to talk to men in more nuanced ways that say, what's the workplace we all want? If we ask men, do they think workplaces should be equal? The vast majority say yes. If you ask men, do they think feminist policies are a good thing? About half of them are against it. Yeah. So it's also how we talk to men about what equality looks like. So I think there is confusion. I think it's okay for us to acknowledge that men are having trouble with this confusion. And I think women as well around, well, what's the energy in the workplace? How do I step into this workplace? Do I have to act like a traditional man to succeed? What kind of a box and a trap is that? Do I have to say, it's work 24 hours and nothing else to succeed in the workplace? Do I want that? So again, I think it's okay if we acknowledge it's kind of confusing. And we need men to be part of the conversation about equality. And I think we need women to acknowledge that men's confusion is real. And perhaps we both need to look at, kind of step into that conversation with compassion rather than judgment, which I think is where we often get stuck.
Mm-hmm. Can we maybe dive more into that patriarchy actually hurts men too? And, your study, the Men Box, even found that young men who adhere to some rigid masculine norms are more likely to experience mental health issues and are inclined to have, depression and even suicidal ideation. So how does the patriarchy harm men who don't fit the ideal masculine stereotype?
Yeah, the list is long. I mean, you started with many of them there. Suicide, men are 3/4 to 2/3 of suicides in the world. Women attempt more often, men succeed because we have access to weapons, we use methods, we don't think we can stop and ask for help. Mental health, depression rates are about the same between men and women around the world. Men are about half as likely to seek help when they have depression. Not that women are getting all the help they need by any means, but men are less likely to stop and seek help. Men are the majority of those who die in war, traffic accidents, murder, homicide. Women are the majority of who experience violence in the home. Men are the majority who experience violence from other men outside the home. So I give those examples to say patriarchy harms us both. And I think we have to, sometimes I'll hear men want to say, well, I experience more of that harm. I don't think it's about saying who experiences more. I think it's about saying we both experience it as men and women and non-binary individuals as well. There's a lot of harm that patriarchy makes for all of us, while at the same time, we as men have privileges. The way the world looks at us with our deeper voices and thinks, oh, he must know more. And now we have an expression for that of mansplaining, right? Where we're sort of calling men out to say, you don't know more just because your voice sounds slightly deeper and we've historically thought you are the one who has the knowledge and women are the ones who do other things. So I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that complexity so that we can, again, to that point I was making before, to say, if you look to me to say, you also experience these things, men, and how can we work on this together? It's a different conversation than saying, you've always had privilege, you're always in charge, now it's my turn. We're sort of stuck in this zero-sum game of who wins and who loses. Mm-hmm. You cited our study. We've done a study that we call the Man Box, because one, it gives an idea of I'm stuck in this idea of manhood. And many boys and young men can go, oh yeah, I can think about that. I can't ask for help. I'm feeling really moved by this at the moment, but I can't show my deep emotions. I think I've got to be in charge all the time. I think I'm the one in charge of when we have sex and how we have sex with my partner. I don't really think caring for the home is my thing. I think I'm in charge of work and bringing home money. The more men believe in those views about manhood, our research has shown across countries, in 60 countries around the world, everywhere we've asked these questions in representative surveys, the more I as a man believe in those, the more likely I am to harm myself and harm somebody else to me. I'm more likely to drink too much. I'm more likely to have a mental health issue. I'm more likely to use violence or harassment against someone else. And I think partly what we've been able to show with that data is to say, men, we suffer from this. This causes us problems. And we need to be allies together with women who have been asking this question for years of how we make manhood. So getting men to kind of go, oh yeah, I'm affected by this. The challenge is how to get men to be able to reflect about that without getting defensive, without saying, wait, are you attacking my manhood? Are you saying the way that my dad taught me to be a man is bad? It's a challenging conversation because we're asking you to reflect on something that you learned from men that you love. And we're asking you to say, well, maybe they weren't all good. Not the men, but the ways they learned to be men. It's not an easy conversation.
Yeah. Also, your study, State of American Men, I want to touch upon the male loneliness and the emotional isolation, because the report found that 2/3 of surveyed men aged 18 to 23 agreed with the statement, "No one really knows me." And this findings actually align with broader research by American Survey Center, where there is really a decline in male friendships.
Yeah.
Since 1990, the proportion of men lacking a single close friend has increased fivefold to 15%. And this trend is even more pronounced among unmarried men, with 1 of 5 reporting no close friends. And among men under 30, it's 1 in 4 reporting no close friends. And also, the Man books explored the rigid masculine norms, discourage men from even seeking emotional support. So why do men feel so disconnected, and why is it normalized for women to have closeness with women?
Yeah.
And when, men are close with men, it's considered or ridiculed as gay or weak.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all the statistics you brought up, I mean, there is, let's call it what it is. There's a loneliness crisis among men. Young women are facing it as well, but young men at even higher rates. It was already happening before COVID, and then COVID came on and it was, like a opportunistic infection and made it even worse. So we've been spending more time at home, more time on our devices, more time in the US, we describe it as being in your basement. That is, you may still live at home with your parents. You may live in the household with other people, but you're actually in an isolated part of the house with you and your device. The same survey that we did, State of American Men, 1/3 of young men in the US don't see anyone outside their home on a weekly basis. So again, with that 2/3 say, no one really knows me, and 1/3 don't leave their home. And the other scary part is that half say their online lives are more interesting than their offline lives. So there's a lot of reason to just say, man, we should be concerned about this. And we know what the spirals that start there. We get gambling addictions, we get porn addictions, we get you being called into these angry spaces online who say, why are you sitting there by yourself? Why are you letting yourself be the victim? Here's where you can go. And the places they're calling you in often are not to connect in good ways. But there are some, there are some of the good ways happening there. So all to say, it's real. And I think we've not yet figured out, how do we get you to put down your device? How do we stop indicting you and saying it's your fault? Stop doing that and begin to invite you into offline spaces. And I think that, to me, is probably the key issue at the moment. How do we get young men to come to spaces where we interact with other young men and to acknowledge you've got a deep hunger for just friendship? There is a lot of friendship happening as well. Men are playing lots of sports. We do hang out with buddies in spaces like that. We've got to figure out ways that we also open that up to be that it's not just, high five, how's it going, dude? But that we create the possibility that you also talk about. When you say, how's it going, dude? I can say, not too well. I really need to talk to you about this issue that's happening to me. You asked the question, why are we stuck behind this facade, right? Why do we act like we don't need anybody? The phrase I probably used thousands of times with my parents when I was a teenager was, I don't care. I don't care, right? We're sort of taught from young on that if you show vulnerability, you're not a man, you're weak. If you're too close to your male buddies, that must be gay, and that's not okay, right? Homophobia hits really strongly there together with other rigid norms about manhood to say it's not okay that you're vulnerable, right? The phrase, don't cry, tough it up, play through the pain, man up, all those words push us into that man box we talked about. And if you hear that thousands of times growing up, and you know that you're judged by it, you are called all those words that we call to you if we think you're not a tough guy. If you're called that by your peers, your parents, teachers, the television you're watching says men don't do those things, you start to believe it. And so we're walking around as men with a huge amount of fear. A colleague of ours has a simple activity that we also replicate with boys and young men, which is you take a piece of paper and say, this is, draw your face, and this is your mask. On the inside, write how you feel inside. And on the other side of the paper, write what you show to the world. It is jaw-dropping how common it is across the thousands of young men that my colleague Ashanti has applied this to, where on the inside it's scared, lonely, wants to talk to someone, vulnerable. And on the outside it's tough, I can make it, don't look at me, mean. I mean, that's the mask that we wear, and the mask that men have become really comfortable living in.
I want to also touch up on the violence and the masculine norms, because the report, Masculine Norms and Violence, actually highlights that the societal expectations of masculinity contribute to the higher rates of violence and perpetration among men. And Gary, your work has illuminated the ways rigid masculine norms fuel violence, and you've personally lived through one of the most extreme manifestations, unfortunately, a school shooting. Yep. I know that from your TED Talk, you talked about this, and that it even influenced you in pursuing this career of yours. So when we talk about aggression as a product of societal pressure on men to be dominant, to be strong, to be feared even. How do you see this playing out in cases of mass violence like this? Is there a distinct link between the way boys are socialized into masculinity and the tragic reality of gun violence?
Yeah, a big question, and one that, it's very close to home in my own past about it. I mean, at the broadest level, probably research that we've done around the world, about 80% of boys experience physical violence from other boys and men growing up. So that's at home, school, community, sports field. We make violence normal among boys and men all the time. You don't really get through school and get through secondary school in most countries in the world without having been hit, beaten up, part of a fight. We make that violence kind of normal in men's lives. Lots of guys have gone through that and don't go on to repeat violence. But we do know that the violence that we experience and witness growing up is often a trigger for violence we may use later on. It also becomes crucial whether we have someone who breaks those cycles of violence. Someone who doesn't reinforce them as simply do that, that's okay, but someone who says that is not the way we have to be. This is not normal who we are as men. It's not in our genetics. It is something we learn and something we can repeat. If you take that kind of masculine script, right, that all of us have experienced violence, or most of us growing up, we make it normal too often. We don't let boys talk about it, and we often don't have ways that we break the cycle. Then you throw in issues of gun culture, right? Countries and settings where access to guns is ubiquitous, considered part of manhood, and it's not always bad, right? I don't think owning a hunting rifle and having that be something that you enjoy doing by yourself or with your family, those things aren't negative. But we have, the US is this perfect storm where we've decided for the last 20 years that not only can't we infringe on you having guns, but we've made access to automatic weapons that are military grade weapons. that are now widely owned by civilians. And then we take that loneliness crisis that you talked about. And then we talk about the lack of mental health services for young men. And then we talk about cycles of violence that you may have witnessed growing up. We've got the possibility of a perfect storm. I think it's important to say mass shootings are very rare. There are other forms of homicide that are much more common. The issue is when they happen, they cause trauma and collective trauma of a kind that's far bigger than a single homicide. They are happening more often in the US. Another thing that we know is that there's a copycat effect. As they get attention online, other young men kind of say, well, I feel desperate. I have nowhere to go. I feel helpless. And I saw how that other young man got a huge amount of attention. He became an anti-hero for whatever time while that case was being looked at. It's why the families in the US now have demanded, and most news media don't report deeply on the shooter, precisely because we don't want to give that additional attention to men who carry it out. It's a complex issue. I think it's kind of the tip of the iceberg of the other harms of men. I think we have to be careful to say that not every lonely man who has access to a gun and has mental health issues is going to go out and cause that kind of harm. The vast majority don't. But it should be a wake-up call to us of just how confused we are in the lack of attention to the deep loneliness and mental health and trauma that a lot of men experience, and I would say in the US and elsewhere.
Yeah. Thank you. This is it for the first part. We're gonna take a little break and then we jump into the premium.
All right.
Let's talk about Trump and masculinity. How Trump's politics is projecting on masculinity.
Half of men in the US tell us they think women's rights have gone too far. About a third tell us they're worried they're going to get called out for sexual harassment or sexual assault when they didn't carry it out. It's simply gone too far. Trump came in and said, it did go too far and it's crazy and I'm going to get rid of it. One of the things that Trump did first week in office was he gutted all diversity and gender equality programming. And if we look at the gaps of voting, who were the ones most likely to vote for Trump? Men with less than a college education.